very glad to have a chance to see all of you in Bangalore. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, instead addressing you from my dining room here in New York, but I was in Bangalore just a few weeks ago under the auspices of the Indian Academy of Sciences. Indeed, a trip organized by one of your members, Pratha Majumdar, who is likely to be around today, and I greet him with this message. My goal today is relatively simple. I'd like to tell you about two things. First, I'd like to give you some indications of how the Science Council worked on the genomics report that Anna Laura Ross has just introduced you to, and tell you about some of the recommendations we've made to the Director General for how to make genomics more effectively practiced throughout the world. And then I'd like to give you an example of how genomics is being used by an organization that I'm affiliated with here in New York, the New York Genome Center, in our efforts to understand cancer genomics more profoundly. So as you already heard, the Science Council was begun by the Director General almost 2 years ago, with 9 members shown here. And when we first met for the very first time to give the Director General some advice, we very quickly focused our efforts on the idea of reviewing the world of genomics, which had come into particular prominence, not just because of the work that had been done over the previous 20 years, but in particular because of work being done with genomic tests during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we felt very strongly that if we're going to abide by the idea that everyone deserves health, and that WHO had a responsibility to make clear what paths would lead to better health for everyone, we had to give advice that would encourage WHO to try to provide as many of the new technological instruments that were available to allow healthcare to be delivered and prevention to be carried out in the best possible way. So without any real argument, these 9 folks, not all of whom are bench scientists, not all of whom are geneticists, in fact, most of us are not, quickly focused our attention on the idea of promoting the technologies that have come to be known as genomics. Let me say a bit about how we went about developing our strategy for studying this topic and providing advice. The first thing we did was come to an agreement that genomics is having a tremendous influence on health, but not just on health, on other fields of endeavor as well, and I'll mention those in just a moment. Secondly, that the effects on the pandemic had dramatized how useful genomics can be, and indeed Anna Laura's comments about genomic surveillance in efforts to detect epidemic threats early on illustrate that point. Thirdly, we knew from our own engagement with the scientific enterprise that there are many organizations that are already engaged in the promotion of genomics and the execution of the principles of genomics in medicine, research, and public health. And we all come to this problem feeling strongly that what is done in high-income countries should not be done just in high-income countries, but that low and middle-income countries shouldn't be left behind. We, as I'll now discuss in some detail, were guided by many experts who were brought in to virtual workshops that were held in the fall of 2021. We needed these consultations because, as I mentioned, most of us are not experts in genomics, and we needed to get views from many countries and many people working in a wide variety of disciplines. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about these, what we learned in these consultations. We had 3 virtual meetings, each with in the range of 100 to 200 people attending, and many speakers from all over the world, including India. These 3 workshops delivered answers to the following questions that we posed. The first workshop was focused on the benefits of genomics, which I think many people were surprised to find are very broad indeed. Secondly, we wanted to think about how we could be useful. That is, what are the impediments to making better use of genomic technologies, and what are the avenues for overcoming them, especially in countries with limited resources. And thirdly, we knew that there were ethical, legal, and social issues and issues of governance, and we wanted to explore the questions of how those questions can be managed with some help from WHO. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the observations that were made at these workshops, because even though some of us thought we were fairly well educated in these topics, I think for many of us, there was a tremendous sense of revelation when we heard from people around the world, many of whom came from low and middle income countries, and were already doing sophisticated, productive, and useful work. So one of the things we learned is that despite the focus that many of us have on things that are being done in high-income countries, indeed, technological improvements with instruments and procedures that are now costing much less than they did at the beginning of the era of genomics were already driving pretty widespread use of genomics in at least several low and middle income countries. Second, we found that there were many applications that had already proven to be valuable in LMICs during the pandemic, but also in other areas, as I'll mention in just a moment. Then we also were delighted to learn that many countries had already embraced applications of genomics in parts of our social and cultural activities that are not always associated with medical research, such as agriculture and aquaculture and nutrition and the study of insects and improving economic status and in cultural studies of ethnicity and understandings of population dynamics, issues that are extremely important in understanding how the world's population is evolving and how the world is changing. Fourth, we learned that, yes, lower and middle income countries were not as advanced in all fields as those in high income countries, but they did extend already quite a bit beyond infectious disease, and programs in India and Thailand and China and many other places were already addressing questions that helped to diagnose illnesses in people whose mystery had been whose illness had been a mystery beforehand, trying to understand the dynamics of drug delivery, diagnosing issues that might be illnesses that are confined to fairly small areas of the world. The development of the genetic origins of developmental disorders were among those that were surprises to us. The work on cancer was certainly well appreciated by many, but the sophistication of that work in many countries was very encouraging to our group. And then we also learned that countries take pride in their successes in the world of genomics, and that they have all kinds of secondary benefits for doing research of other kinds, for promoting science education, for improving a number of other kinds of sciences, especially computational-based sciences. They promote industry, and they help to achieve the development goals of the United Nations. In the second work, so that workshop established for us the idea that there were lots of benefits well beyond epidemic control and more general health issues, and it convinced us that there were many things that could be done even in some of the poorest countries to put genomics into place. In the second workshop, we learned about many of the impediments to doing that, and there were many countries that often were very similar to countries that were succeeding in the world of genomics and even regionally associated, and that those countries were deficient in the development of genomics, and we were prompted by that to think about how we might improve the status of genomic work in those countries that have not yet succeeded. And of course, one of the things we learned was that there were some very obvious deficiencies in those environments, a lack of resources that could be devoted to the development of scientific technologies, a deficiency in the number of personnel who are trained to do the work of genomics, a difficulty in access to the materials required for doing work in this field, and the kind of infrastructure, buildings and machines and service contracts that are necessary for genomics to succeed. And we identified as the biggest needs the requirement that more local talent be trained, and that government resources be more generously contributed to the growth of genomics activities in these countries. Informatics, of course, is important in all genomics work, but in general, not adequately attended to. To achieve many of these things, we viewed it important, and so did many of our consultants, to try to connect the sectors, the government, the academic sector, and industrial or commercial sectors. Motivating investment is obviously a very important feature of this, because the countries we're talking about have limited resources and have to be convinced that there would be a reward for making investments in this branch of science. And some of the issues that lie outside of healthcare delivery or public health preventive activities, including agriculture and a study of ethnicities in the country, were important motivators in our view for promoting investment. The need to engage with the genomics industry, the people who supply machines and reagents and service contracts and other things, can be extremely important. And we heard from several witnesses that the genomics industry is, of course, interested in building its business by identifying new consumers of their products. And they have and will in the future be interested in promoting adoption of genomics by providing cost-saving arrangements and philanthropic support for the development of genomics. And finally, we heard from many people who belong to organizations, most of which are multinational, composed of healthcare providers, bench scientists, disease advocates, and many others who are already making significant contributions to the development of genomics throughout the world. So we had a lot of ideas about how things should be recommended to the DG and to promote adoption of genomics. But we knew that if we provided too many recommendations, they wouldn't be listened to. So we tried to consolidate our views by developing 4 straightforward themes for the Director General to contemplate. The first was the role that WHO can play in promoting the adoption of genomics by making the case for it. The second was to do a variety of things that I'll describe in just a moment to facilitate implementation of genomics. The third was to do a sort of self-evident thing, which is to encourage collaboration so that not every country needs to do everything, and people can group together regionally or by discipline to try to succeed through collaboration. And finally, while we encountered a number of issues related to ethical, legal, and social issues, we didn't propose to resolve them during our own discussions, but instead to see ways in which WHO could help in the future to resolve these issues by convening the relevant people and discussing issues in a way that would lead to international solutions. Let me just briefly tell you what we recommend to WHO and to others under these four themes. Under the thematic umbrella of promoting the use of genomics, we were especially keen that WHO, which doesn't have the resources to pay for the establishment of genomics, could use its strong stature as a leader in public health to advocate for the expanded use of genomics. Secondly, we believe that the member states of WHO, which is essentially all countries in the world, with just a few exceptions, could be developing under the guidance of WHO a program for advocating for the support of genomics. Third, many professional organizations which have connection with WHO could also participate in this advocacy by demonstrating what they as professional societies do, either on a regional or national basis, to promote it. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, WHO could establish a standing committee, a genomics committee, if you will, when the Science Council moves on to other things, so that there's an annual assessment of what WHO is contributing and a way to facilitate interactions between member states and WHO Central. I'll say more about this committee in just a moment. Under the implementation guidance, we've argued that the WHO should provide guidance to member states on best practices by collecting information in the ways that you've heard Anna Laura describe for other topics. WHO can play an important role in persuading member states to design national programs that allow each country to describe how it's going to build or expand its existing genomic capabilities, or to join a program through collaborative arrangements with other countries in the region. We believe the WHO has the stature to bring the commercial sector together so that perhaps under the auspices of the Genomics Committee to make the products and the other technologies, including service contracts, affordable in low and middle income countries. That's the way they're going to build a global consumer base, and the motivations for the commercial sector to work with WHO and with scientists around the world, we think is pretty compelling. And finally, we did a fairly extensive survey of potential training programs to try to produce adequate personnel to do genomics in all regions of the world. And we identified a number of existing programs that could allow those organizations, both public organizations and those in private sectors, to help with the enhanced training of individuals who can use these technologies to public benefit. The collaboration theme was perhaps the simplest. We identified along the way several regional activities that were clearly promoting the use of genomics in poor countries. And we argue that WHO should use those as examples to promote further collaborations, because those will be essential for many poor countries to get involved in this new global activity. And we particularly recommend that agencies that fund genomics and medical research and improve medical care should promote such collaborative arrangements and bring together people from a variety of disciplines ranging from computational research and medical research to the training of healthcare personnel to promote optimal use of genetic information. And finally, we feel strongly that organizations that emerge from civil society, from academia and industry should be brought together to help solve important health problems through the use of genomics. Finally, in the ethical, legal, and social issue domain, we argued strongly that while we couldn't, as a science council, solve some of the more difficult ethical, legal, and social issues, we could recommend that WHO working with this proposed the proposed genomics committee could be the resource that's used to try to settle these debates by bringing together people from a variety of points of view and a variety of locations and disciplines to try to resolve the debates that exist, especially about attribution of credit, access to genomic information, and other complex issues that we think are soluble, but require a neutral place to have these debates. And this we felt was important for bringing to the attention of governance bodies in member states the issues that their countries are debating. And we think that in the long run, WHO could become the global authority on these ethical, legal, and social issues, especially those that involve genomic applications, which are inevitably global because people move everywhere and everyone is facing more or less the same set of concerns. Most immediately, we think there are a few things that WHO can begin to do, even with fairly limited resources. One is to establish this external advisory group that we've been calling the Genomics Committee. Has not yet been established, but we think it can be a very important tool if WHO is going to play, as we hope, an important role in carrying out genomics activities throughout the world. To do this and to put other recommendations in place, it's going to be important for WHO to hire additional people to work with the member states. And it'll be important for WHO to help the convening process to bring leaders of the commercial sector, people who are experts in training, people who are ethical and legal scholars to help resolve debates in these sectors. And WHO does a lot of its work with its regional directors. For example, Dr. Poonam Singh, who is the regional director for India and other parts of Southeast Asia, a person I had the pleasure of meeting when I was in Delhi a few weeks ago, and working with those regional directors to help to apply the recommendations that we have made in our report to the actual building of the genomics enterprise will be critical. Now, in the first part of the talk, which is the longer part, I've tried to outline for you how the Science Council has operated in undertaking its task for the Director General of providing advice about how to promote genomics. And I'd like to spend a few minutes before I conclude by telling you about a project I've been involved with here in New York that illustrates the potential of and the difficulties of pulling genomics information together to try to more profoundly understand the nature of one remarkable collection of diseases, namely cancer. And here at the New York Genome Center, where I'm involved in the oversight of its activities in the genomics of cancer, we've built a program called Polyethnic 1000, which is intended to increase our understanding of cancer by looking at patients who come from a wide variety of ancestries, and taking advantage of the ethnically diverse population of New York City to try to produce data that has been missing so far from efforts that have been made at NIH and Britain and many other places to try to understand cancer genomics by diversifying the kind of data that has now been accumulated. So there's been a lot of attention given, especially in the US in the last several years, about health disparities between individuals in our country who are descended from Western European populations and those who come from Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, and who are frequently grouped as African American or Hispanic, or Native American. And these are headlines from a number of articles that indicate that in cancer as well, we haven't guaranteed equity for individuals with different ancestries in the pursuit of of solutions to the problem posed to health from cancers. This is particularly well reflected in the publicly available databases of genomic information from cancer patients. We've had a lot of experience here through the NIH and through the work of societies like the American Association for Cancer Research in profiling tumors with techniques like whole exome sequencing or profiling through the analysis of small numbers of genes. And those databases have been well organized and publicly available, with, of course, some restrictions. But the dramatic thing that becomes apparent when you look at the self-identified origins of these individuals is that over 75% of the samples come from European, mainly Western European people of Western European origin, with only small numbers, disproportionately small numbers of people from origins in Africa, South America, Asia, Eastern Europe, and some other places. So one of our goals in building the Polyethnic 1000 project was to provide greater attention to people of non-European populations. The rationale here is that we have good reason to believe that while somatic mutations tend to dominate thinking about cancer, germline variations are very important in affecting the risk of cancer, as well as responses to therapy, the severity of the disease and the outcomes of the disease. We also feel that by looking at more diverse populations and sampling the full genomic diversity that exists in the world, we have a better chance of discovering important components of the biological processes that lead to cancer, and to develop better options for care, prevention, and improve outcomes of cancer. But of course, there's a social factor here, namely that inclusion of all populations improves the confidence the public has in the healthcare industry and encourages participation in research. We in New York have a special characteristic, and that is that New York is a home of people from literally every country in the world, and the diversity of ancestries here is impressive. In addition, we have many cancer centers that can help obtain patient samples. The Genome Center itself, I don't want to spend time talking about the Genome Center in any detail, but it has a special expertise in not just in exome sequencing, but in whole genome sequencing and in computational methods that are needed to evaluate and learn from the data that we accumulate. The initial goals of this project were to build a research consortium, not always an easy thing in a competitive atmosphere like New York City, where healthcare organizations can be competing for patients and competing for results, for research prominence as a means of improving their financial situation. We wanted to build a database that could be used for analysis and for contribution to national and international databases. And we wanted to support projects that would address some specific questions about cancer disparities, especially in understudied populations of patients. This meant establishing components of a research consortium throughout the New York metropolitan area, which, as this colorful map shows, has congregations of people of different origins in different parts of the city. Many South Asian people, for example, in northern Queens, many African Americans in Brooklyn, mostly European descendants in Manhattan, and so forth. So to do that, we had to recruit over 16, now close to 20 participating sites, unite many collaborating scientists with site coordinators at different sites to validate diagnoses. And we had to consider many of the other aspects of a study like this that include use of institutional review boards to judge the ethical features of these studies, to look at the legality of these studies, to improve technology transfer. We needed resources, which came initially from a funding organization called the Mark Foundation, and we needed scientific expertise provided by the leaders of the cancer centers throughout New York, and to just demonstrate that this machinery that we built worked. We analyzed a couple of hundred stored cancer samples accompanied by normal tissues from the same patient to come up with a demonstration that we could confirm the histological pathology and get whole exome sequencing data from these patients and analyze the patients with respect to their ancestry. And of course, one of the first things we learned is that, in contrast, when we look at the signatures of ancestry, either on a continental basis, as shown in the middle panel of colors, or at a more refined regional basis, that they don't always conform to the claimed ancestry that are declared by the individuals, as shown by the skinny line of data up at the top. So this demonstrates that we can establish a fairly refined picture of ancestry, which of course in many cases is partial. For example, African Americans can have anywhere from 10% to 100% African DNA commingled with DNA from ancestors from other parts of the world, Europe, South America, Central America, and Asia. The red bars toward the right are people of Asian descent, and there too, more refined analysis demonstrates the variation in ancestry among these individuals. As soon as we established that the system would work and could allow us to gather information from large numbers of individuals from many parts of the world, we had a competition that solicited roughly 20 applications from groups throughout the P1000 network, and they were judged by experts from other parts of the country, and 7 were selected as multi-institutional teams to work on at least 8 different types of cancer. We, of course, had to recruit funding to support this work. We got an assistance from the commercial sector, from the Illumina company that supplies reagents to provide reagents at low cost for whole genome sequencing and RNA-seq. We built a research consortium that meets at least quarterly, has a mentorship program built into it with scientific leaders from the cancer centers in New York, and brings in external speakers to make this consortium an active research activity. Just as one example of those 7 projects, colleagues of mine at Weill Cornell Medicine are working together to study ethnic disparities in the clinical outcomes for patients with urothelial cancers. Bladder cancers are documented to be more aggressive and with a higher mortality rate in African Americans than in European patients, that is, patients of European ancestry. And these individuals shown here are working together and with the New York Genome Center to try to understand the basis of those disparities. In addition, we've had help from 2 faculty members who have vast experience working with health disparities. A radiotherapist, Dr. Balagan, who works at a hospital managed by New York Presbyterian in Brooklyn, and Melissa Davis is a population geneticist and cancer genomicist who has been on the faculty at Weill Cornell Medicine, and they've been devoting half of their time under a scholarship program that we developed to guide people in all of the 7 research projects about how to solicit patients to participate in this study, how to guide clinicians and pathologists to provide materials for the project, and otherwise work on the development of this genomics activity. The next steps in this effort are diverse. We're continuing to increase the number of samples and patients by working with both individual patients and people in the general community and in the research community. We're developing clinical sequencing as well as research-based sequencing so that we can return results to patients. We're trying to find other ways to include more minority populations. We are thinking about working on other cancer types, and we'd like to increase the number of patients who come from some of the populations underrepresented in our studies so far, particularly patients from Asia. There are other genomics technologies that can be brought into this discussion that we haven't yet probed, including the genomics of the immune system, single cell genomics, and spatial genomics, all of which we have expertise here in New York, but they have not yet been applied to the study of these samples from underserved populations. And there are some in our organization who would like to integrate into the genomic analysis some of the environmental components that contribute especially to somatic mutations, including diet, socioeconomic factors, and so forth. So what I've tried to do in this time is to tell you about 2 things that we hope will improve the equitable use of genomics to improve health globally. That includes establishing advanced technologies everywhere, as we recommend in the report that the Science Council recently issued. And I've tried to tell you about how one organization here in New York, the New York Genome Center, has tried to use genomics as a way to do better planning about how to carry out research and deliver healthcare that respects the diversity of the populations we're dealing with and the many factors that contribute to the development and outcomes of cancers. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to take some questions if some time remains.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Varmus. Anybody, any questions? Okay. Sudha? Yeah. No. Give it to Professor Samir also is there, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Sudha.
Thank you, Professor Varmus, for sharing with us your work on equitable, access to genomics across the world. Very quick question is, with globalization and especially, countries like the United States, where you see people of different origins have settled down, and there has been a lot of intermixing, and one would imagine in a couple of generations you would have nobody of a pure race anymore. How would you think this will impact interpretation of genomics in associations with diseases?
Well, you're drawing attention to a very important factor in how we analyze these samples, because the reason I showed you some of the information from our early phase of the Polyethnic 1000 project is to show you that we do have the tools that allow us to say not only how much admixing has occurred among different people of different ancestries, very different ancestries, but also allows us to look for inherited variations that may be specific to one region of the world or another, and try to correlate those variations with the variations in the nature of the disease, I didn't get into the details about how any particular cancer might be demonstrated as different from other manifestations of the same cancer, but histological differences in the the somatic genotype, and other features may be ways to correlate ancestry with the attributes of the disease. This is not a simple task that's going to be solved by one study in one city. What we're hoping is to set an example for how such work can be done and have it emulated in other places, both countries of origin, where the inherited genotype may be less admixed. But as you know, even in India, which is the country of origin for many of our patients in parts of New York, there is a tremendous amount of genetic diversity, and that's true of Africa as well. So it's really important to know about the inherited variations that indicate lines of ancestry, so that we can try to correlate some of this incredible genetic diversity that exists with attributes of the cancers that we know have variations that can be attributed to, at least in part, to genomic features. We don't deny the other factors that go into healthcare disparities, including access to care and environmental factors that contribute to the causation of mutations or variations of behavior that may be independent of ancestry, such as cigarette smoking.
Thank you.
Professor Samir.
Dr. Varmus, 30 years back, we all had a promise of genomics one of the early help will come for cancer. What do you think, which direction we will go over the next decade that we will be able to say cancer is no longer an OE, we have a precision medicine for that?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to stop worrying about cancer as a disease. It's a disease that reflects the fundamental principles of evolution of species and the growth of cells. And I think cancer is always going to be a threat. We're never going to be saying cancer is over. But I do think we can come to a point where cancer is no longer a significant cause of mortality, because we have tools that allow us to treat cancer more profoundly, detect it more quickly, prevent it in some cases. It's impossible to answer your question with one simple point, because cancer, as you know, is a collection of diseases, all of which have properties that lead to different kinds of solutions. Some cancers, such as cervical cancer, is caused in almost all cases by infection with human papillomaviruses, against which we have yet to fully employ a powerful vaccine that is already dramatically reducing cervical cancer cases in the US. And now that India has also taken up the vaccination program, will be very beneficial in India as well. But we have many other cancers, most other cancers, that don't have that kind of simple solution. Mutations are going to occur, and those mutations are going to drive aberrant behavior of cells. We can obviously help by understanding the immune response against those mutated cells by developing drugs that specifically target the biochemical characteristics of mutant products of those mutant genes, and by developing new strategies that I think eventually will bring together traditional procedures for treating cancer, that is surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, with the new tools that are in our therapeutic toolbox, namely immunotherapies and specific targeted therapies.
Yeah, and since both of you are, I see Laura also there. So, COVID has told us that if we share data, open source, we should be able to achieve results incredibly fast. And we have demonstrated, whether it is vaccination, development, everything, treatment. Why you think WHO will not be able to initiate an open source initiative towards cancer diagnostics and therapy?
I'll leave that to Anna Laura, who comes from WHO. I'm not, I have some opinions about that, but I'll let Anna Laura take that one.
So I can try and address that. I would first of all say that the open science, very broadly speaking, is one of the key values of WHO. So across that, thinking about open access publications throughout the whole gamut of what open science means. So it is a large principle. I would invite you to look at some of the details of the guiding principles. I think that there are some specific cases in which I think the way that the guiding principle was indicated was as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So there are some specific considerations that we do obviously see value and that we recognize that that need to be taken into consideration also to be able to protect the intellectual credit of certain researchers. So I would say obviously openness is a value that we promote across the board, but I invite you to look at some of the nuances in the guiding principles.
Yeah, NIH did for tuberculosis. Francis Collins opened up everything. And is it the pharma companies' pressure that is preventing us to solve cancer, diabetes?
No, I don't believe that.
So NIH and WHO will make some move to make sure how we can move towards as much as possible, because now ChatGPT is there, OpenAI is there. OpenAI can be used by millions of Indians to actually contribute to the global health. So will it not be a good opportunity? Because young generation really don't worry about that much ethics and worry about their data protection, especially in India. I can see that. Social media, they share data, which otherwise they would not have shared. So is it a new opportunity that we go into OpenAI and create possibility of a global cooperation through WHO?
Well, I'll leave the WHO part to Anna Laura, but I would just say that NIH has been in the forefront, and I particularly have been contributory to that in making journals as accessible as possible, creating public digital libraries, promoting open access publication. Doing all those things, though, does not solve the underlying problem of what causes cancer and how we're going to treat it effectively. There will not be there can never be, I think, a demand that everybody share everything at every time, because there are things that ought to be kept held in confidence until they're developed to the point of being reliable. Reliability is an essential feature of all this, and quality is an essential feature. And retaining some tools to allow scientists to evaluate each other through peer review, through commentary online. All these things are going to be important, because not everything that people say is right. So this is a more difficult situation than what you're portraying.
Maybe I
Moni, you have a question?
that what Professor Varmus has just said, it reflects the position of the WHO, which is certainly, as I said, the promotion of open access and sharing of all relevant scientific information. I would cautious a little bit, because I think you mentioned social media as well. We all know the level of misinformation, but also disinformation. So the deliberate transmission of wrong information. So I think we do have to be cautious in what is being shared. And I would underscore what Harold said. Obviously, what we want to be able to do is share information correctly, but be able to be informed and rely on the reliability and the quality of the results that are being shared. And unfortunately, I think the last few years have showed us that we should be very cautious when we look at information that's shared on social media and other such channels.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to retreat from this enjoyable event. It's now 15 minutes after the hour. Thank you all very much for your attention and your participation in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Varmus and Dr. Anna. Appreciate your presence and sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.